Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Life on the Hulls. It's a bit cool, as you can see I'm here with a toque on, and yeah, it's been a bit of a cool day and we're heading for an East Coast low, which is essentially a cyclone south of the tropics, and it's about to belt us tonight. So I'm locking down the hatches here, I'm putting away all my tools. I don't want any rain blowing through here and affecting all the good work that I've been doing over the last couple of months. Now, fortunately today I've just glassed this guy in. This module's been the bane of my life, and now it's out of the way. I've got the entire bridge deck to play with, which means that's a lot of work to come. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please share it out, like the video, and jump over to the composite shop. Really getting a good following over there too. Thanks for joining us, and I'm about to get into it, so let's do it. It's a wild and woolly day here in Jervis Bay. I've just bought my Blackwater tanks up from the hull up into the factory up in here, and I'm going to insert the rims that I cut out of those faulty tanks from the guys that delivered them to me ages ago. So these I've basically drilled the holes, and I've countersunk the holes slightly because I don't want to use too long of bolts so that I've got threads protruding into the tank. So I've got nylock nuts going to hold this in, but by countersinking I'm able to use an 18mm long bolt rather than a 25mm one, which will leave 5mm of thread that's just going to get putrid with all the black water that's going to be inside these tanks. So just by countersinking these holes a little bit, I'm able to maintain that as well. So first thing I need to do here is I need to sand the actual edge down. I do have a little bit of a raised epoxy there from when I painted the internal and sealed the foam core within the hole there. So, and the advantage of that epoxy is that it's actually sealed the foam as well. So there's no chance of any water ingressing, delaminating the tank. I think these tanks will actually live 10 times longer than I'll ever live. And you know, ultimately they're pretty much indestructible. And I know the capacities, we've got 80 litres in the smaller one and 110 litres in the larger one. So all up 190 litres of Blackwater storage for my Catamaran is not a lot. First things first, I'm going to get my roller sander. I'm going to clean up these edges here so these fit nice and flush. So once again, the procedure is to drill the size of the actual screw or the bolt that's going to be holding it in place, which is about the thickness of this rivet, and then lift the hatch out and then drill a larger hole, fill that hole with epoxy, let it set for a few days until it's rock hard, then come back and re-drill with the original drill. Now the reason why I do that is obviously we want to core the foam with epoxy and then have that bolt sitting in a sealed epoxy, encapsulated in that epoxy. And the reason why we want to do that is we don't want water seeping down through the top and into the foam and delaminating the foam sandwich. So important. A lot of rot on decks of boats and hulls and things is because of this issue. It hasn't been cored correctly, particularly with all these balsa boats that are being made out there. I mean, you've only got to get one leak and it'll ultimately, it can degrade an entire section of deck or hull side. So I'm paranoid about it. The more I can keep out of it, the better, even right down to shit tanks, you know, very, very important. So I'm going to get in and drill these. Again, I've set a key. The first one is this one here. I've made a little black mark here on the actual rim and on there. Because I've drilled the holes, I've drilled 8 holes in each rim, but it's reasonably random. I've tried to get them, you know, equidistant, but that's impossible on a circle unless you're using a jig. What I've done is I must have my starter, and that starter is the one that's marked in black there. It's going to be pinned in position after the hole's drilled, so I can then do the subsequent holes, ultimately to ensure that it's always going to go back in the same place when I put it back on later on after I've cored it all. So I'm going to get into that now. Okay, now I've got my holes drilled, I'm going to core it. And I'm using an 8mm drill bit here that's actually going to then provide the core. If you think I'm wasting my time, you know, let me know. You can see how it's breached the edge here. So that's going to be filled with epoxy. Now, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have caught it, but now it's going to be filled. I know I don't have to worry about that core being destroyed. You know what I love about YouTube? You can make everything look like it goes perfectly. I can edit that so that you're not going to see what just happened there, but I'm not going to do that because ultimately no one learns anything if you don't cock something up, and you must sort of stuff up to realise where you've made your mistake so you don't do it again. There's something I couldn't have avoided here. The hole that is cut for the rim here, so imagine this hole here, this rim here only fits a certain size hole. I'm then trying to put some screws in it, and without having a larger flange, which I didn't have the option for, because the plastic actually on the actual tanks I cut it off actually faded away, so I didn't really have any flange, so to speak, on the actual thing. The problem was that the holes are very, very close to the edge of the rim that I've cut, so as a result I've had a blowout. And what I'm talking about here is this. That hole there, which is going to have a 5mm bolt through it, now has a 1 centimetre hole, and I've had a blowout in the core. Now this is pretty common because my holes are so close to the edge. This one's not so bad. This one here is really good, and and here we have an absolute disaster, and it's happened a couple of times again over here on my key. So by refilling these holes with epoxy, I'm actually circumventing the problem. I had to show you the mistakes I make every now and then just so you can learn from mine. But the only way I could have avoided this is by not coring it and having a smaller drill bit, and it's happened on the other one as well. It has happened a couple of times to me. That one's actually not too bad. It's only really the one here where it's breached. But once I tape this and fill this with epoxy, that'll be actually better than it was originally. But good to see mistakes being made, and good to see how you can rectify them and move forward. So very important now, I'm actually going to fill these holes with epoxy. Now the problem I've got is that if I just poke epoxy in there, it's going to flow down into the bottom. So I use some packing tape and simply back underneath it. And that'll stop anything from dropping down into the actual tank itself, which is not really going to matter, but you don't want clumps of epoxy down in the bottom of a Blackwater tank. What will happen is the Blackwater will get caught in there. You'll end up with build up, and yeah, not ideal. We've got a pretty nice smooth surface in there. So I'm just basically backing the underneath of these holes, and then also on these ones where they're blown out, I'm a bit of masking tape where it had breached the hole will stop any overflow, and then still be able to remove it simply. For a small job like that, just drilling 16 holes, drilling them, coring them, filling them with epoxy, it's a 2-day effort. You have to basically have jobs like this lined up. You do this one, you walk away and do something else that's more important and more pressing, because you can't come back to that for at least a day, if not 2 days. Now we've only got 13, 14 degrees here at the moment, so it doesn't work. You've still got to have a reasonable ambient temperature. I'm going to make sure it's at least 18 to 20 degrees in here in this factory over the next day or so to make sure that this cures, and I'll sit out in the sun once it gets its initial cure, just to make sure that I force it to go to its limit, and then I can come back and drill the holes and install my hatches. I've zipped up here to the Blue Mountains, to my old hometown, just on the other side of the Blue Mountains, and we call that the sandstone curtain here in Australia. Basically, once you cross the line, you're into a whole other world, and it's cold up here. We're at about 1,000 metres where I grew up. Here's a big park across the road. I used to run amok over there, chucking rocks at each other, and it used to be a pine forest. It was like a plantation pine forest. But I've come up here to build a set of stairs for my beautiful mum and install it in the front of her house. So my brother-in-law Jimmy and David have actually removed all the brickwork here. It was all collapsing. My dad wasn't that conscientious when he went to bricklaying. I don't think there was any foundations under it, so building up a big set of treated stairs here. I've almost got them together. I've been here for 2 or 3 days, sort of mucking around, trying to get it all level and everything, and make it a little bit safer for Mum. She's in her 80s, so we want to make sure that there's always good safety in hand. Drove up to Mum's to the Bet's rarely in, but Bet's been in a lot lately, haven't you, Mum?
I have.
Yeah, the old COVID ISO thing.
I've had house guests.
Yeah, I've had guests here all week, but we finally got it sorted after 2 years of procrastinating. You happy with them, Mum?
I am.
Good, they'll be good. They'll be good when they're done. Righto.
Very happy.
I'm pretty happy.
I think you're very clever.
No, it's all good. No, I'm happy to be able to do it. So I'll just put a handrail in here and make it nice and safe, and then we'll get some paint on it.
The sun's gone.
3 days I've been here, haven't I?
Yeah.
1 day of intense rain in the coldest town in Australia. Recognised as the coldest town in Australia. Still wore the shorts though. But yeah, it's done. I reckon I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, it looks all right, doesn't it? Nice and safe for all the Mum's friends and for Mum. And got a video of my girl and my dog.
My girl, honestly.
And sat here earlier and she had a warm bum because she used to have concrete to sit on. Imagine a -9 morning sitting on concrete.
I don't think she'll be sat out here with Mum tonight.
What do you reckon, Lex? You happy? Having a holiday at Nan's? Good stuff. Tied it into a mess, but it's going to neaten up. I'll get some mulch in there tomorrow and do the garden and it'll be all finished. You happy, Mum?
Yep, very happy, thanks, Star.
Nice warm bum?
You've done a very good job.
Well, at least you'll be able to sit there on a freezing mornings and get a warm bum, eh?
I will. No, you've done a great
Oh,
job.
it's all nice and neat and all safe again.
You're very clever.
Love you, Mum.
Her I love.
Going to call that a job done. It's been, believe it or not, 3 days. It took me to build this set of stairs. I built a set originally down at the factory. It's 5 hours away, and brought them up here. And yeah, guess what? 1 step too short. Dad's original brickwork. Somehow he had like 210 mil per step rather than 180. So base that over 5 steps, we need an extra tread. So guess what, I had to do a whole new set of risers, and yeah, and then I had to work out the handrail. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to work that out, but what I've done here, it's a bit unusual. I'm going for a little bit of bespoke joinery here, but you can see here I've actually ended it here butt jointed into the post. But one thing I did do is I've routed a slot into the actual handrail, and what that's done is given Mum something to grip on. And she has a lot of old folk that come around and, you know, with arthritic hands and everything. Jimmy and I decided it was worthwhile having something that they could physically grip their fingers into, and yeah, at least make it safe for them. You know, at the end of the day, the old bricks were falling away, and we have got a bit of a problem over here on poor old Mum's brickwork here, where Dad's got a couple of steel lintels going across underneath and a couple of posts holding it up. But you know, it's not worth mucking around with that stuff. I'm better off just building the stairs and get out of here, because if I get a brickie in, he's going to want to rip the whole thing down, start again. We've got a couple of little cracks in there, but we won't tell council about. Here we are, 2 weeks later. And the reason why that is I had to zip up to my mum's, who lives about 5 hours away up in the Blue Mountains, which is the coldest place on earth at the moment, and build a new set of front stairs and do some work on a house. So basically that 2-day exercise ended up taking a week, but it's so good to catch up with her, and so good to get some stuff done for her. You know, it's been a long time coming. I've been pretty pathetic about following up on the jobs at Mum's, but while ever we can keep her at home, we're going to do that by making our place safe. Okay, so these holes have all been epoxied, and sorry, the holes have been drilled for the screws and bolts and nuts, which are all sort of 316 stainless and nylock nuts and washers on the back. I'm going to drill these out, and then we're going to get on with mounting these with the Sikaflex, the 291 Sikaflex, which is an adhesive and a sealant. Very important, we use an adhesive and a sealant to bond this down to the top and to stop any chance of that black water from coming out of the top of this hatch. Now, there's a few substances I don't mind dealing with: polyesters, vinyl esters, epoxies, but this shit, Sikaflex, it doesn't matter how hard you try to be neat, it's gonna go everywhere. No matter what happens, it's gonna be a mess. So you're better off just to prepare for it. Get your rags soaked in terps or metho or whatever you might want to use, and just, you know, accept the fact you're going to get covered in black shit, and you're going to go through 10 pairs of gloves putting on a hatch. But anyway, that's the job that we've got to do, and it's the ultimate stuff. Now for the horrid job. And once I start to squeeze it out, it's going to go everywhere. So here we go. There's something to consider too, because I'm tightening quite hard. I'm going to let the sealant do a lot of the work. I don't want to bust through that countersink that I've put in that very, very thin polyethylene tank ridge there. So we don't want to be busting through that. So we're letting the nylock and the sealant do the job. Now there's ample sealant in there to suffice. As you can see there, I've got squeeze out right around. That indicates to me that I've got a good seal. And you know, one last thing to check would be to make sure that the lid actually screws on still, to make sure you haven't distended that hatch, which I haven't. No, perfect. Alright, so we can now go to the immense job of cleaning up all the black shit. Before I go headlong into bolting this floor down or glassing this floor down and putting it in place, I need to deal with this Blackwater tank. Once this floor, this sole section is in place, it basically comes to the end of this foam riser here, which means that it's covering over this tank. And I've worked out in the bathroom when the head module that I'm going to need to create a hatch directly over the top of this Blackwater tank. But for now, what I need to do is make sure this is secured in place. Now I've got a couple of ways I'm going to do that. So creating a distance between the hull side and the tank itself, although there is a natural gap from the virtue of the lid that I've put on it, I want to elevate it slightly, about 5 millimeters up off the hull. And I've come up with the idea that I use a couple of these ABS shims. Now this is actually leftover plastic from the thermoforming boats that we built here for years under license from Seaward, and now I'm the agent for Delta in Australia here, Delta Kayaks from Canada. So the ABS is perfect because firstly it's rot proof, secondly it's very light, and the great thing about it is it loves epoxy. Epoxy resin will hold that in place down there. So what I'm intending to do is to have this in between the tank and the actual hull side, and giving that ability just to have it sitting on a couple of shims so that it's not going to firstly rub, and secondly it'll allow for any sort of condensation build up or anything to run away, or so to speak, down into the bilge and away from harm's way, and to stop it from accumulating, obviously attracting mold, etc. So that's a bit of a plan that I've had for some time. But it's important that I get these in place now. Now that's going to mean that I'm going to need to rough up the surface around where I decide to put these shims under the Blackwater tank. So there's going to be a bit of fiddling getting the right positioning, and probably a little bit of hot glue involved before I get that sorted out. So there's been a lot of prep work down in here. I've lifted the tank out. As you can see, I've got the mounts for the Blackwater tank all ready. They're all sanded up and prepped. You can't just epoxy to flow coat because there's a wax in between the flow coat and the epoxy, and ultimately, although it'll stick, it won't last. So you're better off to sand it back to the raw glass where I've had the flow coat here, here and here. Now, future proofing here, I actually have freshwater heads. I bought them, they've got a solenoid on them so I can draw water out of my freshwater tanks to run the toilet systems. Now that's going to be advantageous because you don't end up with a lot of the calcification problems you have inside the sanitary hoses, and also you get a lot less smell with freshwater toilet. However, I'd like the option to be able to switch it over in midstream, so that's something I'm planning on later in the day. So as a result, I'm going to need a raw water intake somewhere in this area here. Now I've already put a through hole mount here, and I've cored the foam and backed it up and put a backing plate in there already. I've decided before I go and finish up in here and before I put everything in, I'm going to put another one down in here, and that'll be my intake for future possibility of running saltwater toilets if I decide to run them back into a saltwater environment again. Particularly if we're on long passages, I can just run saltwater flushing all the time without having to draw on our very precious fresh water that's under here and up in the forward there. So it's more of a future proofing thing. I can actually rig the plumbing, don't need a lot of other accessories other than to run basically another vented loop up here to draw the water in. I've been through about 4 iterations of how I'm going to secure this Blackwater tank in place. I started off with the strap idea. I was going to have some stainless saddles here on the bulkhead and basically strap it down. Then I came up with these aluminium angles that I cut and drilled and got all ready to mount. Obviously, one there, like so, to hold it in place at the top, and then a couple down on the side. Now the problem with that is I can bolt those ones in place, no problem, but I can't bolt anything down below into the hull, obviously, because I have nothing secure other than foam and a couple of layers of glass to hold it into. So I've come up with the concept and trying to work out that firstly, this tank is never coming out. Do I ever need to remove it? Probably not, and hopefully not, because if I have to remove it, I'm in deep trouble, and I don't recall any history of anyone ever having to remove a Blackwater tank that's actually fixed in the hull of a boat, unless there's serious damage to the hull, and then you're in a lot of other problems. You're probably better off fixing it from the outside. So we've come up with the solution of using composite angle. Now I don't think one thickness of this is going to be strong enough to hold it in place, so I'm going to double them up, and that essentially now is the strength of this aluminium. So as a result, we can chuck that away, and I'm going to use this, and that way I'm going to be able to epoxy it in place. I have one there and another longer one here. And then I'll be using some slightly smaller ones on the side. So one over here, one there, and I have 2 more that I'm going to put down at the bottom of the tank to avoid any of it kicking out. Now, because I've got ABS shims down in there as well, there's no movement in this tank because it's actually hugging the hull, and it is in fact sitting in there snugly with about a 5mm gap. So I've got all the elements of a very well fitting tank. The issue is I have to epoxy these in and leave them for good. Now once they're in, the only way to remove this tank is to cut these, and you know, if I'm at that stage, cutting a couple of little pieces of angle is not going to be a big issue really. So I had a bit of spare left over. There's nothing worse than throwing this stuff out. I mean, it's probably $5 with a good epoxy there if you're buying that in a hardware shop. So I'm going to glue this piece in here that, yeah, basically glue that in there, just make sure I put it on the right way. That actually forms the framework for the large companionway module. If I glue it on now, it's just one more job it can get done. I was going to go home, but I've decided to smash out this through hole fitting. I've got to put about 6 layers of 600 double bias. In fact, it's 2 layers of 1200 double bias, so that's 2400 plus another 2 layers of 600 double bias, and then another layer of 600 double bias over the top. So all that, I think that's about 7, plus I'll do an additional one just to close it all up around the actual hole and around that recess. But it's going to be a bit of a job. Should only take me about 20 minutes. I'll knock it off before I head home, and that way it's ready to go in the morning, and I'm pretty much moved forward. It's been a big day down in this hole, sick of being in here, just want to kick it in the guts. So I've got my Blackwater tank ready to glue in with these composite angle brackets that I've fashioned up and glued them together and made them super strong. They're actually probably stronger than aluminium, I think now. I remembered that I haven't actually glued the angle under this port side forward cabin module, the angles that actually support the actual the module itself. So while I'm mixing up a batch of epoxy, I don't like to waste it, and it's very easy to waste it because it's so easy to make up too much, or even too little for that matter. But often I make up too much, so I may as well do a larger job while I'm at it. So I'm going to get these out and start to do the angle that I've already got positioned in there. I won't do the ledge that's there because there's a lot more to do in here, but I may as well do it while I'm at it. It's where I can batch up my work, because this is a 5-minute job over here on the Blackwater tank, and probably a half-hour job here, so that's another half hour that I'll progress forward. So first thing, before I put this in, I've just put the first one in there, and I'm just going to epoxy them to the wall of the boat. I may glass over them as well, but I think epoxy is more than enough. That technically is like strong as houses. But checking the tankage level, because I want to make sure my sensors work perfectly as well, and it's dead level. So this tank is in exactly the right position, and now I'm able to simply glue these cleats in place that I've made. And consider it in permanently. It's a year after I made it. That's going to take some time to kick. I've also got to do the ones down in the bottom down there. You can see I'm actually not gluing it to the tank. Don't think I need to. I can always syringe some extra epoxy in there, but for now I think that is more than enough.